Welcome to the Leaving Cert Guidance podcast. My name is Donnchadh. I'm a secondary school guidance counsellor, and I also run the Leaving Cert Guidance Instagram and TikTok pages. On today's show, I'm joined by Ray Langan, who is a founder of Rayse the Game. He's a high impact study skills coach, school motivational speaker, and teen mentor. And Ray is also a qualified psychotherapist. And I was very fortunate to see Ray in action at one of his motivational talks. And high impact is an understatement, Ray, because I don't know how you do it. It's incredible the energy you give off. But also, what I find amazing is how you can hold the audience and their attention and engagement for that long as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Donnchadh. What I always try to do is and the goal of Raise the Game is to give students and young people my outcome is to give them the best day of their school life because
Yeah.
their association with study, their association with school, for many students today can be quite negative. And what I try to do in my programs is to create what I call the motivational climate. We have the hip hop music, we're having a bit of crack, plenty of stories, and what I'm trying to do is kind of weave a little bit of magic to get young people today in their brain saying, I can do this, I can learn, I love learning. Because if you think about young people when they're in primary school versus in secondary school, it's a totally different ball game. So I want them to create a positive association with learning.
Okay, Ray, I'm going to start off with a tough question for you. Is study complicated?
Great question. Um, it depends on the subject, but what I try to do is simplify. So my study system is called the 30-minute study sprint. And within that, I took John Dunlofsky's famous research paper called Strengthening the Student Toolbox, and I took his best study techniques and I filtered them into my system. And in a nutshell, the best study technique is active recall, training yourself to test yourself. So study is as complicated or as simple as you make it to be. But in a nutshell, what I try to do is to make it simple for students to actually say, if I sit down for half an hour and take this topic, whether it's biology or science, photosynthesis, or if it's erosion and geography, and how to have a little bit of fun with it and how to understand the concepts and to drill that down. And then in terms of notes, to be able to create a one-page summary called a whiz grid, and then to test yourself on the key concepts. And that can be fun and interesting if you're using your creative brain.
Now, I'm glad you said active recall because I'm a huge fan of active recall. I always kind of liken it in a sports scenario that you've you're training for the big game. And when you're training for a big game, you generally get a challenge match or put yourself into game situations. So for anyone listening here, Ray, that might not know, what is active recall exactly?
It's the science of testing yourself. So in a nutshell, you have a very E equals MC squared, the most famous formula of them all. Well, on one side of the flashcard, you've got what is, Einstein's most famous theory. And on the other side, the answer is E equals MC squared. So it's your ability to recall or remember that. And I kind of think of this ability to memorize or learn or recall the information a little bit like a fishing line. So you got to hook that information from the back of your brain, pull it forward. And the challenge for a lot of people today is because everything is so Googleable and searchable that people think, why do I have to memorize this stuff? But if you don't have the basic foundation of learning and the building blocks of how different concepts work, then how are you meant to remember or how are you meant to learn? An active recall forces your brain to memorize. And this is where young people really struggle because it's that forcing bit that they're struggling with because everything is so easy to find today.
You've given me a new word from my vocabulary, Googleable. I love it. Googleable. I've never heard that one, but I really like it. And you're right, a foundation for the memory. And I always say to students, they say, oh, well, it's a lot about memorizing that. Well, I said, show me a job where you don't need to use your memory. If I'm going in for surgery, I'm hoping that surgeon has a good memory and he knows how to do this and remembers how to do this. There's not too many jobs where you don't need that. And you're absolutely right, building that foundation for your memory. Now, I want you to let me and the listeners in on a few trade secrets. You mentioned the 30-minute study sprint. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, one of my favorite techniques is the Pomodoro technique. And that's a famous productivity technique where you give yourself 25 or 30 minutes to do a task. And there's something called Parkinson's law. So, it's interesting. I was just coaching a student literally before this interview, and he said, I'm no good I hate studying. I'll just leave it all to the last minute, but I love deadlines. So if you leave your project until 1 hour the night before to finish, then that's exactly what you'll do it in. You'll do it in that time. And the problem for young people today is they struggle with time management so much because we live in a digital world. So I bring my study sessions to 30 minutes, short bursts, and within that 30 minutes, I give them a framework of how to be able to take a topic, speed read it, extract the keywords, get it onto one page, and then start to memorize that. And what they love about this is they say to themselves, I can handle 30 minutes. And if you look at all the top TV shows, Friends, all the soap operas in the UK, they're all within these 30-minute kind of blasts. And I think short bursts can be very effective for your study.
Yeah, that 30 minutes is really good. And I'd be a bit like that as well. I would be quality over quantity. Students say I've studied 3, 4 hours. Is that possible? Can you concentrate for that long? And I just want to talk to you a little bit about concentration. You know, um, Focus and concentration with teenagers. They say this generation really struggles to focus and concentrate. Is this something students can work on?
Everything is trainable. The problem for teenagers today is we live in the TikTok world. And we live in a world now where we're distracted so much. And I know myself, and I think you're a Liverpool fan, but even sitting, I'm a Liverpool fan, but sitting down watching a game of football is so difficult today because we're all on WhatsApp, we're all looking at whether it's Twitter or we're distracted. So we're living in the age of distraction. And I think this is a real challenge. But absolutely, if you've got your focus on point. So when do you get really focused? It's usually when you have a deadline or you're very interested in the topic in which you are covering. So my challenge to any student is, well, if I can't get really interested in what I'm covering, which a lot of young people struggle with, why should I learn Irish or why should I learn biology? If you shorten the session and say, okay, within this 30 minutes, I want to try and extract 5, 10, 20 key concepts, or even in the next 10 minutes, I'm going to do 10 or 20 flashcards. It just gives them better tools to be able to work within shorter time spans, which helps their focus and concentration. And I work with a lot of students with ADHD and ASD and lots of different learning, neurodiverse students. So they will say to me, oh, I'm just no good at concentrating. Well, really, what I need to do is to help them reframe that lack of concentration to say, well, there's times you're very, very able to focus and concentrate. We need to be able to tap into that, just work in shorter bursts. And now you're getting into the concept called flow.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about flow then. I know it's just, even for me, it's just getting that started. And if I can get started, I know, and as you mentioned that concept, flow, I know I can keep going, even for the 30 minutes. And it's quicker than you think when you finish that 30 minutes. But for me, it's getting started is the hard part.
Look, you're human, I'm human. I've been for the last 10 days working on my mock exam study slam study guide, right? So, and I've found it hard to get started. 90% of a rocket ship's fuel is expended just getting the rocket ship out into orbit. So it's the same thing for our focus and concentration. 90% of our energy can be used up just getting us to start. So how do we get started? Well, you want to start with the minimal viable amount. What can I do even in the next 5 minutes? Well, once you kind of hack your own psychology, and a lot of what I do is actual psychology, it's all about breaking things down, making it easy to start. And again, to bring it back to study, if I'm studying an English essay on, I don't know, Seamus Heaney, well, okay, can I cover one poem? Can I learn one quote? what is the kind of minimal viable amount. And once you get started, it's kind of hacking your way into it. And suddenly half an hour is gone, and you're halfway through an essay. So it's about small steps, hacking your way in, and actually almost reverse psychologying yourself to get started. And suddenly you're halfway through.
Now, again, you mentioned earlier your note-taking technique called the whiz grid. Now, again, after I saw you in action with the students there, and I was chatting to them afterwards, and they were all very impressed with this whiz grid. What exactly is that?
Well, it's a one-page summary. And when I learned about one-page summaries, and I don't know about you, but when I was back in school and college, I spent hours writing notes, highlighting, rewriting, rereading, going back over notes. And I spent more time creating notes. And I know from working with a lot of students, they prefer things in their own handwriting. And I totally get that. But we can spend so long creating the notes that we're not actually learning it. So there's something called the illusion of mastery. Whereas what I do is try to bring you to the minimal viable note, which is in effect, and I taught mind maps for years. I love mind maps. They're very creative. Again, they're one-page summaries. Some people call them brainstorms. But what I noticed was a lot of students didn't like them. So a couple of years ago, I was working with a student who has dyspraxia, and his biggest challenge was actually holding a pen and writing the notes. And in the end, I took one page, turned it around landscape on its side. We put two lines down, two lines across. We put the name of the topic in the center, and then we started to bullet point the key headings and the keywords. And we got about 20 or 30 keywords onto one page. He loved it. And then his mom contacted me a couple of weeks later to say his grades had gone up in that particular subject by 10, 20, 30%. I can't remember exactly. And then I tested this a couple of weeks later in a school with a class. Before I'd even finished the topic, they'd all got through it very quickly. So it gives structure, it helps get the core information. And we know the 80-20 rule, 80% of the content you don't really need. So it's about giving students tools to be able to break things down. And also the night before the exams, you do not want to be trying to reread your textbook. You don't want to be trying to read two hardback notebooks full of notes. But if you've got 10 or 12 one-page summaries, in my case, whiz grids, you can do very well.
Now we have the mocks coming up in the next couple of weeks. A lot of students getting nervous about the mocks. I heard you saying mock exam study slam guide. Is that right? Did I get that?
Yeah, I'm working on the study slam at the moment. And the big challenge for every student is, everybody loses the plot a little bit around January, February, because the mocks kick in. And the big challenge for all students is they do not have the courses finished. The teachers don't have the courses finished, but they're going to be sitting full papers. And this is probably for both junior and leaving cert students, their first proper experience. They're no longer class tests. They're now full 2.5 hour tests with the full course being examined. And this brings a lot of stress, anxiety, and a lot of people can get very anxious and panic around this time. And what I'm creating is a study guide to help students to study effectively, to create a plan of attack, a schedule, and also to be able to manage that stress and anxiety to get the most out of the mocks. Because the mocks, it's like the gun goes off and someone's saying it's business time, and you're meant to get nervous at the mocks. It's actually a way of training yourself to be more calm and more confident under pressure. And with the right tools, you actually get the best. I failed my maths mock exam. I remember the night before my maths running into my dad and saying, I'm going to fail, I'm going to fail, I'm going to fail. He looked at me, he said, well, fail then. I said, I'm not going in. He said, he made me go in. And I needed the failure. I did. I got 35%, but I went up to, I think it was 70%. I went from, in today's money, a H6 or to a H3. So I needed that failure. But a lot of students are afraid of the failure. You got to embrace that, learn from the mistake. The purpose of the mock is to give you feedback. And what I say to students, don't fear the mocks, use the mocks as feedback.
And if somebody wanted to get your mock exam study slam guide, how would they go about that?
It'll be on the website, www.raysethegame, that's Rayse, raysethegame.com. We'll have it up there and it'll be within all the different social media outlets, Instagram and Facebook.
Any advice for parents over the next few months? This is a difficult time for not only 60-year parents, but third-year parents. I was actually chatting to a parent who has a third year and a sixth year this year. And it's a hard time for them as well. But what kind of advice would you give to parents?
Calm is contagious. The role of the parent is for them to stay calm. What I see with too many parents today is they're being pulled into doing the homework, doing the study. As a lot of parents say, it feels like I'm doing the junior cert all over again.
Yeah.
And their job is not to do the junior cert. Their job is to actually observe their child's behavior in highly stressful situations and to actually uh, try and be asked good questions, make the cups of tea, the dinners, all of that stuff, give them the support. But what I see with too many parents, and one of my favorite books is The Thriving Child, William Stixrud and Ed Johnson. And they talk about this concept of the parent as a consultant. Whereas too many parents are still the supervisor of their child. And the supervisor is up to primary school, right? So your job is to keep your child safe, make sure they don't run out in front of a car or injure themselves with a knife and fork. But what I see with too many parents is they're writing the notes into school. Can you excuse my child from homework? They don't want to answer up in class. And I know anxiety is a big issue, but there's too many accommodations today. You got to make them go in, face the challenges, and that way they build resilience. And the problem I see with too many parents, students, and again, I say this respectfully, I know from working with parents and talking to parents all the time that it's a very, very complex and difficult world that we're now living in. But you got to step back, give them the space, and your team will step up. And it's in that space that that's where they will grow and become more resilient.
I'm going to steal your calm is contagious line, so I am. I'm going to use that. I like it. Very good. I'm going to get you, just to finish up here, I'm going to get you to put your psychotherapist hat on because you said yourself anxiety is a big issue. You also said students get nervous around the time of mocks, but nervous is okay. So there is what I always explain to students is there's ordinary everyday stress, and that's fine. It actually helps us perform. And then there's extraordinary stress. Now, leaving cert, the junior cert, is not an extraordinary stress. I would call it an ordinary everyday stress. If you were a child or a parent out in Gaza, that's an extraordinary stress. So being stressed to a certain extent is actually helpful to us in our performance. But what would you say to those who are maybe going over the edge a little bit with their anxiety and stress?
Well, anxiety can be your edge. It can be the very thing to drive you forward. Now, when you're 15 or 16 or 17 years of age and your exams are important to you and you're in competition with this person over here and that person over there, it kind of feels like your world right now. And I know for a lot of young people, if they don't get the grade, that can feel devastating. Or for other people, they don't want to try because if I do try and I fail, my God, now I have to face the reality that I'm stupid. So there's a lot of issues going on for different students out there. And what I always remind students is, and young people, this is all comes back to your brain. And again, there's something called the upstairs and the downstairs brain. So when you're panicking in a set of exams, you go down here. So there's the hand model of the brain. You're fight or flight. You're in fight or flight mode. And when you're in fight or flight mode, the brain goes into red alert. The amygdala fires off. There's cortisol in your brain. You cannot think. And when I train students, and this is really, really, really key, that when you start to regulate, when you start to manage that anxiety, and the only way you manage that anxiety is to be exposed to it and train yourself to be more calm, to be more relaxed. And by the way, I had a massive panic attack in my chartered accountancy final exam. So I know exactly how this works. And I know what it's like to be sitting in that exam hall and feel like your world is ending. But what I do want to rest assured with young people and for parents that if you have a highly anxious disposition, it is possible to train yourself and to learn tools. Mindfulness is one concept and one idea, but once you understand how your brain works, you start to dial back. I talk about dial it down. So on the anxiety scale, you're at a 9 or an 8, 10 out of 10 on the anxiety scale. We got to dial that back to 5 or 6, where there's a form of healthy anxiety. Now you start to regulate, you get back up into the upstairs brain. I'm getting a little bit technical here. And now you can function, and now you can start to access the memory in your brain. So the point being, anxiety can be your edge. You can train yourself to cope better with anxiety. I mean, the first time a fireman run into a fire, I'm sure they were anxious, but over time, it's a bit like flying. First time I got in a plane, I was very anxious. And then I went to New Zealand and jumped out of a plane and I was really anxious, but survived. And it's the same with an exam. I swore I'd never go into another exam, but it was only when I start to learn these different tools. And also self-talk is really important. How you talk to yourself in an exam. So I train students to talk to themselves in a positive way and to be a bit kind to yourself. And also to be okay with failure. Sometimes it's okay to get 30 or 40%. And more from working with a lot of students who have dyslexia or dyspraxia or ADHD, your H3, your O2 might be as good as someone else's H1. So the big thing for any young person, you got to try and not do this, even though we all do this, is compare yourself with that person on your left or right. Play your own game.
Yeah, brilliant advice. Play your own game. So you can find Ray on Rayse the Game on Instagram. That was RAYSE, as Ray said earlier on, and also raysethegame.com as well. Ray, as always, it was a pleasure to speak to you, and thank you so much for taking the time to come on to the podcast.
Donnchadh, thanks for having me, and best luck to all students with their mocks and the rest of their exams this year. Thank you.